is fun.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to welcome you to this amazing Boston FinTech Meetup. I'm Sarah Miller, I'm the co-organizer, along with a large team: Denise Johnson, Craig Westmoreland, Jean Darling, Tatiana Urban, Mike DeAngelis, Mark Andre. You name it, you can't go a rock far in Boston without finding people who support the Boston FinTech community. And I just want to welcome you and also let you know that tonight, thanks to Craig, we are actually live streaming tonight's meetup. So we appreciate your work to get us here, your technology. And then I would be remiss if I didn't tell you as well, for tonight's panel, that we are so thankful to McCarter and English for hosting us in their offices over a lovely dinner. No one up here is drinking wine, but we appreciate you've also helped us with some spirits. And Ben, thank you for your support of the FinTech community, particularly as we think about this important topic of open source. And so with that, I don't want to spend too much time up here, but Ben, may I ask you to kick off?
Sure.
Thank you. With our great panel.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to stand up briefly because I'm short. It's a long room. So first of all, my name is Ben Hron. As Sarah said, thank you very much for coming. I'm a partner in the corporate group in McCarter and also part of our venture capital and emerging technologies group. And we cover the waterfront, but most of what I do is represent entrepreneurs and investors in the startup ecosystem. And in particular, we do we're doing a lot of work, especially recently in the fintech space. So it's very exciting for us to be here. If any of these questions about McCarter afterwards, I'd love to talk to you about it. I'm happy to go on ad nauseum about us. People are great. But at the moment, we'll get on the program. We're really excited to be part of this program because there's just so much happening in this space so rapidly. And we have two fantastic panelists to talk us through everything. So with that, what I'd like to do is give them a chance to introduce themselves, and then we will we'll go into some of my questions, and then we will jump to audience Q&A about a half hour or so. And so please hold your questions until we get to the Q&A part, unless I've just totally screwed something up and need something you can't hold on. So, all right, with that, yeah, gentlemen, can I ask you guys to just give a little intro to yourself?
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ben. I'm Gabriel Rubro. I'm the Executive Director of the FinTech Open Source Foundation, FinSvcs, KZU. I'm pretty branded here. Just quickly, I was born and bred in the open source communities. I am relatively new to the financial services world. It's been about 3.5 years since I started. I had the honor to be able to run this foundation. I am based in San Francisco, as you might hear from that Italian I spent all my life as background in computer engineering, and so I'm a techie, just this guy in a big town uniform. So we have been pursuing this, I think, worthy but pretty hard challenge of bringing open source in financial services. That's what our foundation is about. And so I'm looking forward to discuss all of you. We have some of the largest investment banks behind the foundation, but we also have some of the most promising startups as well as big tech. We'd like to have an open community that is welcoming to everyone. So really excited to be here. One of my first times in Boston. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, John.
Sure. Thanks, Ben, for hosting. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to participate. I'm excited to be back. I'm always impressed by the energy and the enthusiasm and the interest in the Boston fintech scene. I live in DC, so I'm still a swamp creature. I was in the government for 7.5 years, on Capitol Hill for a while, and then in the Treasury Department. And my current day job is advising fintech startups on regulatory and policy issues. And by night, I participate in multiple efforts up and down the eastern seaboard to build sort of fintech communities and ecosystems. So from Boston RegTech Meetup, which we launched last year, and was off to a strong start, to I'm a regulator in residence at the FinTech Innovation Lab in New York, which means I'm basically a mentor to big companies in that accelerator program, which is a partner of the Boston FinTech Sandbox here. And newly this year, I'm a mentor of Clean City FinTech Sandbox all the way down in Charlotte. So I got the whole Eastern Seaboard covered. But pleased to be here and join the program.
All right, thank you both. So where we wanted to start out is by looking at how open source and open banking is impacting large financial institutions, and really how they're adapting to it. And so, Gab, can you talk a little bit about, given that open finance is still in its early days, and the cost benefits of participating is sort of hard to evaluate at this point, what's the incentive for large established firms to engage in open source now as opposed to waiting things out to see sort of how it plays out, understanding a little bit more about the risks?
Yeah, I think it all starts by understanding what the real risks are. I think there's largely a cultural misunderstanding or myths about the risk benefit of open source. Again, I come from other industries. I've worked for many years in commercial open source companies, already selling into governments, into financial services. So definitely open source adoption is not a new thing, albeit it's always been sort of proxied by a commercial vendor, the Red Hat model. Many people told me, yeah, we use open source now because we use Linux. Oh, sure, that's not really necessarily the approach of open source that we'd like to see at a strategic level. To your question, we were formerly known as the Symphony Software Foundation, and over the last year, we expanded our remit to become the FinTech Open Source Foundation, in a realization that there was a much broader opportunity than just collaborating on Symphony. And really the sort of, I would say, three reasons that we identified with our board and these large investment firms were really efficiency, cost reduction. I think that's sort of the main and probably better understood values of open source, where we can utilize non-differentiating components. In a world in which the margins were not necessarily where they were years ago, in a world where also there's increased costs for regulations, certainly these firms are looking more and more at open source as a way to be efficient and innovate faster. And sort of connected to it, I think this has been like a big point for us to be able to actually expand and become FinOps. It's really talent acquisition and talent retention. I personally would not hire anyone without looking at the GitHub profile. I'm hiring a developer. I think GitHub is the new nickname. And I think in a context in which the talent crunch is sort of even bigger, especially if you compare sort of financial services with big tech, I think providing a safe avenue for developers to not just do open source, but really develop in a more modern, sort of thinking about DevOps, thinking about cloud, in a more modern way is certainly seen as a huge way for financial services to retain and attract best talent. So I think talent acquisition and retention, and certainly efficiency and cost were the first two, I think, motivators.
Jonah, do you want to address that?
Sure, yeah. I think there's a couple observations, and yeah, we should push back here if you disagree with us. It's interesting to me that Symphony, for example, started in the capital market side, where there is a real need for shared infrastructure, shared platform. Yeah. I need to be able to communicate with those I want to trade with, execute trade with those I want to trade with, and not sort of on the retail side or in the true commercial banking side. Where maybe there are fewer of those non-differentiated components that you mentioned before. It's also, starting in the open source seems to be driven by the big firms, which, implies to me that it's being driven by firms who are starting to bring in-house more of their development capabilities. whereas smaller firms who are, almost inherently forced to outsource that or rely on the vendors and the vendor approach. So as you start to insource that, if you're bringing in like true technologists, this is the way they're used to operating. These are the platforms that they're used to working on. And so I think my guess would be that that's what's driving that's sort of an outside observer's perspective. In the commercial banking space or retail banking space, thinking about open platforms, that risk benefit or cost benefit analysis looks a little bit different. And I think for the most part, certainly in the US, banks have not quite come around to viewing that as a positive sum game. They've not quite come around to the idea that open standards, is better for them and for their customers and adds more customer value in the long run. I think that shift is underway, but no bank views themselves as Apple with the App Store. There's still a little bit, in the mode of trying to basically be a distribution channel for as many products and their own products to their customers as possible. But like I said, that's sort of, you mentioned open banking, that shift is somewhat underway, but it still seems quite early in the retail side.
No need to see the reaction.
Yours okay?
And I think you're absolutely right. We haven't, as much as we are the FinTech Open Source Foundation and our charter was really, built in a way that, we want to expand in retail and other areas. Certainly we are rooted in capital markets, and that's where sort of the most of the activity we're seeing is right now. I think an area that probably would connect both is actually the regulatory area. I feel like that's one of the areas where there are common requirements. There are, sort of non-different things, and something that could be interesting for the regulators as well. To, pushing for standards, pushing for transparency, access of talent to the regulators.
Well, and so let's go down that path a little bit, because the regulations, obviously, it's an international economy now, and all these players, most of these players are operating internationally, but the regulators are still regional, or country by country, or European Union, the US. And you've seen the development of very different regulations in different countries. Europe is, in some respects, much further along than the United States is, both in terms of open banking, but also in terms of data privacy. And you've got this sort of tension there that they're trying to reconcile, and a lot of companies now are forced to deal with. And now the US is sort of having to react to that. How are you guys seeing companies in the US react to the regulations that they're now subject to in some respects from abroad? And also, how are you seeing the regulators, Jonah, in particular, the regulators in the US react to this and think about, well, what should the United States be doing? You want to start?
Yeah, I think so. In Europe with PSD2 and then with GDPR, I think that Europe was driven, by a desire to open up their banking system. They have a more concentrated banking system overall, in particular in certain countries than the US does. So I think they had particular regulatory objectives. In the US, what's been interesting is that, while I sort of dismissed suggested earlier that we're sort of in the early stages of this transformation, that was really from the financial institution's perspective. The reality is we've had a wealth of fintech innovation in the United States that has been built on the backbone of relatively open data platforms. Now, it's not being driven by necessarily open source standards, and it's certainly not being driven by a regulatory mandate in the United States. The question going forward is whether we'll have a regulatory framework that is actually designed to facilitate and support that. And right now, there are a lot of regulatory gray areas, and I suspect that in the relatively near future, those regulatory gray areas and uncertainty will start to inhibit the evolution of some of this innovation that's occurring on top of what to date has been a relatively open data platform. GDPR and privacy, Europe has historically had a different attitude around privacy than we have. But the reality is, there seems to be a felt need in the United States for some set of standards, and maybe that the push towards GDPR in Europe has sort of forced the U.S. industry to, come to grips with the fact that there should be some standards, and that they'd rather have certainty in standards than no standards. And in particular in the U.S., they'd rather have one federal standard maybe than 50 state standards. So there is, sort of been an interesting shift from the industry perspective in attitudes around privacy regulation over the last year plus, certainly since the Cambridge news broke. So that's not a prediction that we'll have data privacy standards in the United States anytime really soon. Just that I think momentum is sort of swung in its favor.
Yeah, and from what we're seeing right now in terms of the collaboration we're seeing, it's still really early days. I mean, we're very focused on, we have a global community, but we certainly have started focusing on investment banking and management, so driving, and we're really just at the very beginning of our approach and so work with regulators on regulatory implementations. Two things I would say. We are for now looking at very sort of horizontal standards. For example, we have JP Morgan just moved forward initially on cloud certification, really working together on even just the basic requirements of encryption at rest, encryption in motion, making sure that the different cloud providers comply with those standards. And I think the value of what we do is the vision that we're pushing, not just for banks, but actually for startups as well, for fintech startups as well, is that there's an opportunity here to collaborate on, sort of to use open source methodology to collaborate on regulations. So it's kind of a meta level that we're trying to bring forward. And this is actually then going to be applicable if we are successful at making them comfortable to work in the open, to we have an antitrust policy, we have conflict of interest policy, we're very conscious about the sort of reluctancy of these firms to work in the open. But if we are successful, even with the basic sort of horizontal, merely technical standard, I think that sort of collaboration model can be then applied, regardless or more effectively across the pond or retail banking, which is added Capital One, and more sort of retail focused banks to our community. So I think for us, we're still very much early days. We think there's huge potential, but we're still learning to collaborate in the open. And I think if we are able to nail that, that will be easily transferable to, more easily transferable to other regulations, geographically wise, or sort of different areas of
the collaboration approach is, it has historically been a challenging one because regulators expect, banks to be responsible for their own compliance, not to outsource it, not to, and if you're going to rely on a third party or a vendor, you essentially still own the risk.
Yep.
And of course, there are just a bunch of other challenges involved in collaborating. I think it's notable that U.S. regulators in the fall openly encourage banks, in particular small banks, to collaborate around innovative solutions and KYC and AML space, for example. So I think attitudes are starting to change a little bit about the nature of collaboration. And your example of cloud is interesting. It's been interesting to watch how fast regulators' attitudes about cloud in particular have changed over the years. Like just a couple of years ago, when I was sort of starting to work in earnest in the fintech space, there was still a tremendous amount of skepticism among bank regulators about reliance on and use of the cloud. And that changed virtually overnight, and to the point where I think for the most part, they get it, they understand it.
Yep.
And it's sort of my hope that they will, as they get up the learning curve, better understand other collaborative methodologies, understand things like open source a little bit better, and get more comfortable over time. But that happened relatively quickly, and in some cases, I think it was driven by the fact that at least certain regulators started to use cloud themselves, and that was a big turning point. All of a sudden, when you turn around and see your colleagues in another agency using it, oh,
FOMO?
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. Well, but I think just to close on this one, what I realized is that, and you make a very valid point, I don't want to become necessarily a proxy for the banks when I talk to regulators, but I certainly would welcome support of the regulators and sort of the approach that we're taking, because in the end, it's not just about sharing. What we realized with this cloud initiative is that it's not just about sharing technology solutions and sort of, in this case, we're trying to build infrastructure as code that you can really prove against a certain requirements around an actual test suite that, will tell you green or red in terms of actual compliance of the different cloud service providers. But we realized that there was a value in also having these firms come together to interpret some of those requirements. So kind of the initial part of sort of legal expenditure and compliance officers looking at the regulations, they all end up in slightly different places. And if we were able to kind of come up with at least a common interpretation, then we can go back to the regulators, even before we start implementation, say, is this what you actually meant? Is this okay if we don't build this? I think there's a lot of potential that not just on the technology side, but also on the sort of common interpretation.
And I can sort of move the conversation in the direction of how the internal process, as you mentioned, a lot of this historically, a lot of compliance historically has been done in-house. And I've done a lot of work for banks, and the compliance is always the hardest step in closing the transaction because there's so many hoops they have to jump through. And so it's going to have a huge impact on how this is implemented and how fast it's implemented. So I'm curious what you're both seeing, and Gab, I'll start with you because this is what you're doing. You're going out and you're talking to these people and saying, hey, look, this is something that really is valuable to you, but you have to get past that mental block of, well, this is what the regulations say and this is what we have to do. So how are you finding people reacting and how are they adapting to what seemed, and I don't think either of you are in disagreement that open source is going to permeate the financial sector in many ways over the course of time. How fast, how slow, we don't know, but it's coming. And so how are they reacting to that and adapting?
So it's interesting because widely, I mean, we've been, to your point, in this for 3 years, since even the Symphony Software Foundation, looking at banks, the idea of let's build this common platform and banks and vendors will actually contribute to it, would quickly hit the barrier, the compliance barrier. And so yes, probably 2 or 3 years ago, the compliance was really kind of across the board, Europe, US, the main obstacle to collaboration. I think, kind of riffing off of what you said, partly because of some experience done with the cloud process, and I think in terms of cost benefits, the adoption of cloud and adoption of open source have similar cost and benefits. But over the last year or two, first of all, there are companies that have this very much figured it out. We've shared, just to mention one, we've shared a couple of presentations from Goldman. They have a very advanced policy, a very advanced workflow to allow developers not only to consume, but to contribute back to open source projects, something that is not, quirky, is not unworkable. What we realized over the last year is really that ultimately, if we are able to convince them about the business value, we are able to kind of put down some of those barriers. And it's not easy, it's been a long, this is a long, to your point, we're here for the long run. But I think where I'm seeing the biggest frictions right now is really the mid-management, so the frozen middle. Like we do have at executive level, elements like talent acquisition, talent retention, efficiency. Those are really compelling and help us move, the legal and compliance, remove the legal and compliance barriers. We obviously do have the developers, we've said before, are very keen to be able to not only solve bigger problems that they create within their own firewall, which is really, to foster their portfolio, foster their own image. I mean, I wouldn't be here hadn't I contributed to open source code 15 years ago. Maybe not everyone wants to be here because it's certainly a tough challenge. But I think where we're seeing the biggest complexities is in the mid-management, where you can really use strategic, high-level business value proposition to kind of unlock, their developers to invest in open source projects. It's a very time-intensive industry.
I mean, I think the hesitation for a compliance manager inside a firm, are really around trying to understand where are the potential vulnerabilities in this code. This is just some off-the-shelf open source code. Oh my gosh, who's contributing to this? Yeah, this is somebody sitting in God knows where on their, on their laptop, and that's an understandable risk that that person feels like they're taking. But I think the work that Vinos is doing is important because it is, somebody somewhere needs to have vetted this stuff at some level, right? And I think for the compliance folks to start to get comfortable, and I think the more that some kind of standard, some kind of vetting process can be brought to bear, you'll get comfortable. And I think, again, for the big institutions, they're going to have to come to grips with this themselves, but for the small institutions, they're going to continue to be relying on vendors. Yeah. And that's just the practical reality. So whether it's solutions that are developed to work at Vinos and then sort of leveraged elsewhere, or whether it's the Red Hat service model, or maybe it's the incumbent vendors who pick up an open source project and just say, okay, well, I'm going to sort of build my own version of this and sell it to their existing customers. I think it'll come to the vendor channel for all the largest firms for at least some time to come.
Yeah, and I think, sort of just to wrap on this, I mean, if you strip away everything else from what our foundation does, including, open source enablement or, financial services specific solutions and collaboration, the very basic value of an open source software foundation, I mean, if you think about the Linux Foundation and the Apache Software Foundation, is really to be this independent IP container that you can trust. In a way, I soon realized when I was in the foundation that I was basically doing the same pitch as when I was a commercial open source company. I was like, oh, you can go get that hippie open source out there, or you can buy it from us. Now, in this case, we're a non-profit, but it's kind of the same pitch. It's like you can go and take, left pad out there, if you guys are familiar with what happened, a year ago with NPM, basically the NPM ecosystem being destroyed by a commit. Or, that if you take open source that comes from Finos, you're still going to have to vet it. Nobody's going to take it face value, but at least and we have put in place a developer toolchain that makes sure that wherever software comes out of our foundation has a certain, respects a certain license and has a certain degree of security. For example, there are no CDI vulnerability. So I gotta, thank you for the setup. Wasn't prepared. but certainly it is a huge part of what we do, making them feel a bit more comfortable that this is not quote unquote a big deal.
So how are we doing that? What's the product? I mean, what do you say to a compliance person internally at a bank about how they would go about evaluating you or anybody else in the open source space?
So I'm a big fan of automation. I think what we see is that even on the consumption side, pretty much every bank consumes open source. Some of them do it in a bit of a structured way. Some others do it in a very careful way. So what we tell them, so first of all, there is enablement, and we have an open source readiness working group where not only we sort of enable them and we provide some guest presentations, high level sort of policy, business, and technology enablement, but we also put the different members of firms together talking to each other. I think that made them really feel comfortable more than anything that I could tell them. I get the Morgan Stanley guy talking to the Goldman Sachs guy, how are you guys doing this? And they feel comfortable to share it within our working groups. That's probably the most powerful sort of enabler for them. The second thing that we do is we do have an open development platform, which is what we use, as I said, to, it's our CI/CD pipeline. It really validates the code that gets produced by the foundation. We also meant, when we built that, we were meaning that to be a reference architecture for them to take internally in terms of how can you consume open source safely in an automated way, in a rule-based way, in a way that implements your specific lawyer understanding of open source. And so that's, by example and by networking and by enabling them, that's really how we're trying to three-way approach. We're trying to make them feel comfortable that, this is something that they can do.
only thing I'd add to that is just one minor additional point, which is, compliance managers have to think about issues around change management as well.
Yes.
So if, code is going to be updated, or if, there's some other big change to the process, or it's going to change our internal business processes somehow, they have to be very mindful of that, and regulators are very mindful of that. And that's mostly just a matter of sort of being diligent and documenting things and thinking through from a process perspective. But it's just another element of a move towards a different approach that might be challenging for compliance management.
And that's where DevOps would help. If we were really to get to the point that nobody touches anything in production and it's all manages infrastructure as code, I think that would ultimately make things much easier in terms of getting regulators and how you document that. And I think that culturally, open source and DevOps, that same before, have very similar aspects. So we're trying to build on what happened with the cloud, sort of the understanding, the cultural change that happened there. And I think we're in a good spot following what's happening with the cloud.
Yeah, the cloud is interesting because I didn't sort of explain the mindset shift that I at least think happened before, but it took a little while. But at some point, regulators realized that their initial concerns with cloud were, oh my gosh, what about security?
Yeah.
And then at some point they said, wait a second, do I want each and every single one of these banks to be in charge of security for their own IT systems, or do I want it outsourced to somebody whose only job every single day is to manage security? And I think when they started to realize that, actually, the reason you used to think it was a bad idea might be the exact reason it's a good idea. There was sort of big change, and I think you can demonstrate the same kind of value proposition for open source, at least in certain applications in certain cases. You'll have a much easier time. I keep going back to the small institutions because it's going to be hard for them to do a lot internally. So, and the regulators have to think about everybody, not just the big guys. So figuring out how that's going to trickle down probably matters.
So let's talk about third parties in this whole ecosystem, and how will third-party vendors really enter into the space and facilitate the adoption of open source and compliance when the inevitable regulations at some will come into play?
I'll offer two observations. I'm curious to see what Deb has to say. I mean, for one, vendors are using open source now, right? Yeah. So companies are building containerization solutions on Kubernetes, and so they're using open source. It's just being vendor delivered in sort of a service model, and that that still is the easiest way for financial institutions to consume open source. And at some level, they don't even care that they're consuming open source. What they care is that they're buying a solution. The fact that the solution has to be open source is almost beside the point. The subsidiary question sort of I have, and this is just a question I asked out loud without any particular view as to how it develops, is what does that business model look like in the long run if you're building if you're a vendor building a solution on open source? There's very little to stop the incumbent vendors. I sort of alluded to this. So there's very little to stop the incumbent vendors from sort of building their own. So it's not entirely clear to me that if I were an investor, for example, what do I think the path is for a vendor who's building on open source to actually build and maintain a viable business? So that's just an open question I have about the vendor model in general, is whether that sort of VC funded, fintech or regtech vendor is really a viable thing over time, or not. But I think right now, a lot of open source is being delivered through vendors. They're sort of building on open source foundations.
Yeah, and I think the thing that struck me the most, I think there were two things that struck me the most when I first came to this world. In terms of the vendors, like we talk a lot about banks not being sort of ready to consume or contribute to open source. But I would say even on the vendor side of the house, there's certainly a lower degree of, I wouldn't say understanding, but yeah, probably understanding is the right word. A lower degree of understanding of the different potential reasons or business models why you would use use open source, again, as part of your business model. I think cloud has made it incredibly easier to build part of your software open source. I mean, you shouldn't give up your secret sauce and then deliver it in cloud. Ultimately, you're not delivering software anymore, you're actually selling a service. So that's certainly one element. But there's many other reasons why you would want to do open source and open standards. For example, commoditizing your competitor is another one, trying to, that's sort of in a way what the firms try to do with Symphony. And so I think what I've learned is that there's a lot of opportunity in my mind there for vendors because, on the flip side, a lot, there's still a huge lock-in in this industry on some of the biggest incumbent vendors. To your observation, I think the easiest way that I was able to explain sort of what I landed in terms of why would I give up my secret sauce? How am I going to protect myself from a competitor? I think the easiest sort of one way that I was able to explain it was it really depends whether you're building a solution or a platform. And I know the word platform is pretty overloaded. And in this case, I'm really thinking more around platform economies than necessarily platform as a technology. Really meaning that your value is not in the code, but the value is what you're building on top of your platform. What the channels, the value chain is really about creating new channels across people that weren't able to potentially communicate in the past. If you think about Uber, or if you think about Airbnb or Facebook, they don't really own anything. They don't. Facebook doesn't own content. Uber doesn't own cars. Airbnb doesn't own houses. Although they enabled, these marketplaces on top of their platform. And so where I landed, I'm trying to get more and more validation of this assumption. That is that if you're building a platform, it's highly likely that your code is not your differentiator. It's, in the case of Symphony, I strongly feel that it's not their product. That there's so many messaging systems with end-to-end encryption. Less of them that are regulators approved, but it's the network that they have in the system is the fact that they have the largest buy-side and sell-side firms with that. And so I think there's been at least one sort of easier way, because otherwise you can, as you can see, I can talk for hours about this. But the platform versus solution sort of business model was something that at least in the past 2-3 years.
Or maybe some other kind of network effect, like a data network effect, or something on top of
yes. For making money on data, probably is not necessarily the code that differentiates you from others.
So I want to move over to audience questions, but before we do, you both do just a little prognosticating. So as everybody seems to believe, the open source is coming to financial services sector. Give us your view of how that is going to significantly change the sector in the longer term. What is the world going to look like in 10, 15 years that's totally different than the way it looks today? Got 30 seconds.
I mean, I'm gonna cheat by extrapolating whatever the recent trends. That's actually
Probably a good idea.
just gonna make it up.
Never be right. Never right. We're probably living on Mars.
We have seen in the banking space, and I think to some degree in the capital market space, technology enabling a real unbundling of the delivery of financial services. And certainly in the retail space now, the big question is how is that all going to get rebundled? Since me managing 26 different financial apps on my phone is really clunky. And is it going to get rebundled because SoFi, for example, decides to offer everything to their customer base, or is it gonna, or the big banks finally figure out the technology thing and manage to provide, sort of everybody goes back to banking with their bank, but it's just sort of newly digital services, or is it going to get rebundled in more of this platform marketplace type approach, more of a it's still distributed but interconnected? And I think I tend to think it's the latter, but what's necessary for that is for financial services to be, almost fully modular and have full interoperability. And I think open source is key to thinking through that future because it enables interoperability. And if you have that, then you can innovate along any of those nodes along that interoperable platform. And to me, that's the best version of the future because you will get the best innovation and the best competition for each of those different solutions. But it requires interoperability, which is why I think open sourcing and open standards are necessary to achieve that. I remain somewhat agnostic on whether we'll truly get there. It does feel somewhat inevitable to me, but I'm living the frictions of getting there every day, so it's hard to be super out.
So you're not going to make any predictions about warp drive and travel, time travel? All right.
I'm on my favorites.
I was hoping a little bit of feel.
So no, I couldn't have said it better. I felt again when I joined that this was a little bit, at least as far as capital markets goes, I came in with the idea of high frequency trading and algos and quants and super cool tech, and then I realized what happens in the mid office and the back office, and I call that like centralizedness. And I think the FinTech wave certainly has the potential to become a decentralized mess unless we actually have open source and open standards creating the sort of natural building block approach that I think you were sort of hinting to. The most interoperability. One of our first efforts was around desktop interoperability. We have this interface standard that we just released, so I'm completely in agreement with that. And certainly, I hope we do hope that by firms neutralizing their costs, they will stop. I wouldn't say wasting their money, but certainly being a little bit more conscious about not rebuilding the wheel, not reinventing the wheel by rebuilding very similar pieces of infrastructure. I think, again, as we talked about regulations, I would love to see more regulations as code, if you want, being able to actually, again, have an objective red light, green light, sort of test-driven approach to regulations. And I think, again, examples like the cloud certification of the really early days, again, I think that will go by a strong collaboration with the regulators, and also hopefully enabling talent in financial services and in the regulators to sort of work together better through this collaboration frameworks. But I think, again, by saving, by having easily automatable and easily sort of pliable, I think that, again, is going to, I think that there's going to be an advantage for the average Joe down the line in terms of the user experience and focusing resources on actual value-added features rather than plumbing or rebuilding all the same sort of compliance.
All right. Well, thank you. I want to open it up to audience questions, and I'll try to get to as many people as possible. Please, we'll go to please speak up because the mics will pick you up, but the audio on the live cam won't necessarily. Right here in front.
So open source can mean many different things, and the particular physics that govern an open source project can also be very varied. An important component is the particular open source license that a project uses. Are there any particular licenses that you think are very interesting in the financial services industry? Or if you could design a new one, what kind of features or requirements might you give it?
Wow. So we do use the Apache license. That was one of the things that I inherited in the bylaws and in the member policies. And certainly it's been, I know that there's been very thorough conversations within our board and within our lawyers before taking that license. I I think it also, again, goes back to the nature of what you're building. Like, if you are building a platform, you want the Apache license because you want people, it's a very permissive license. It's not a known viral license. It really allows anyone to contribute to it, to take that piece of software and then, resell it commercially, do whatever you want with it. So if the goal is, to have a component that can be used across or commercialized by multiple parties, I'm a big fan of the Apache license. It has to be said that, there are cases in which the GPL or the AGPL license are, viable. I think we're still a few years away before banks, lawyers will not freak out to use any of those licenses.
Never freak out.
No,
It's not what we do. We don't that and explain why things are going to blow up.
You're absolutely right. But I think the GPL license is still seen as a potential risk. I do think there is value if you are a product company and you're trying to just show your source out there while you retain some of the opportunity of dual licensing and selling in a different license. That certainly is a potential commercial strategy. But I think if I look at what a foundation does and sort of fostering collaboration across different players, I think the Apache license is good.
If you don't have a question. Yeah, David from People Hedge. Question on, have any of the use cases you've seen for banks in general lend themselves to real-time audit and eventually real-time regulation?
I think we're still early days there. I think what we've seen for now is mostly, so I think rather than the use cases, the work that we're doing on standards should, we have, apart from the sort of test of interoperability, we have a financial objects program, which is trying to standardize some of those objects. Again, huge topic that probably will require another 5 hours of conversations, but we're certainly trying not to reinvent the wheel there. We're trying to work with ISDA, recently demo. We're having a lot of conversations to see how we can just be a little bit of an umbrella providing open source implementations. Right? I think where standards sometimes fall apart is when you don't have an open source implementation for them. So in terms of use cases, I think it's early days. I mean, we just launched Regulator, but I think that pairing open standards with open source implementations, that is where sort of the auditable part is going to come, more easy. I think we're now used to it, but I would love to be able for the regulators to go and not just look at, a firm's implementation of a certain standard, but actually have a look at how all of them use a common piece of source code that is implementing that standard. Again, plumbing. So not necessarily use case, but more of an horizontal sort of approach.
Okay, good. There's a gentleman back there with my phone.
Yep. Mark Andre, FinTech Sandbox. As most of you know, FinTech Sandbox was created 4 or 5 years ago to encourage development innovation in FinTech by providing free data to startups. So where do you see the role of open source as data commoditizes? Will there be a future where there's commoditized data that comes from an open source solution?
John, take a stab at that, or you take it first?
Go for it. You got an answer, right?
Yeah,
So
It's not an equal opportunity.
So I would say the first thought is, to me, we've been looking for the longest time to provide some kind of data through, our runtime for our open development platform, because I, fully believe that, in this industry, as we all know, data is as important as code when you're building an application. And so, if our developers have access to open source code or open APIs, but then they don't get access to data, it's going to be really hard for them to build something that, if they have to go and use their own data or pay for it, that's not really gonna work. I do think though that again, like code is being commoditized, I think data in a certain way will be commoditized. I honestly don't have the sort of deep understanding yet of that space to be able to tell you when or which data streams will be commoditized first, but it is, again, I've seen that in other industries, so I honestly don't see how, I don't know how long this is going to take, but I think data will follow a similar path that source code.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer, from my perspective, is I don't really see why not. But I do think it'll take some time. I mean, at some level, people who are building data-driven solutions, there is a bit of a magic, secret sauce to what they're building, either in the way that they collect or source the data or the way that they put it together. And maybe the way it gets open sourced is through those incumbent vendors who see an attractive solution, decide that they can build more or less the same thing, and provide it as sort of just an added service for their existing customers. But depending on the data source, I don't see why not. In fact, it was at FinTech Week here in Boston last year. One of my sort of strongest takeaways from that was at the pitch event, there were multiple companies all pitching data-related solutions to investors, and the judges of the panel kept asking the companies, what's your right? Like you're proposing to sell a unique data source to this particular investor, but your business model relies on selling it to all other competitors as well. So how do you navigate that? And it's not quite the same thing, but I think directionally that's it does sort of tend in the direction of data becoming commoditized at some level anyway. But there's still a secret sauce element to it. And for example, in the sort of AI and ML space these days, a lot of the AI models themselves are open source, but the secret sauce comes in training them and what kind of using appropriate data and so forth. In particular, we were having a conversation about medical devices a little while ago. In particular, domain-specific training that's required, and so that's where the sort of value add comes in. So we're not quite there on the data side yet.
Yeah, I would think that it's going to start with the really commoditized stuff, like stuff coming out of the exchanges, and then security identifier data, and it would build up.
Yeah, I mean, we've already taken some steps in the capital market space down that path, some regulatory driven and others industry driven. That, of course, market data is now the exchange's largest profit center, if I'm not mistaken. So that'll be a big fight happening. But certain aspects of market data are becoming, standardized in that sense.
Yeah, and it could be driven by the capital markets, in that there's always that fight between I'm a supplier of the data and a supplier of the data.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, security reference data is certainly one of the areas where we're seeing the initial work. I mean, you know because you participated, but we do have a security reference data working group. We have both the buy side and sell side. Okay. Should have taken the opportunity.
Question in the back, what's that?
Could you compare and contrast? I mean, everybody talks about these kinds of things as if the players are collaborating for the first time, but traditionally there's been a lot of collaborations in the industry, from Bloomberg to Swift. So what can you kind of learn from those prior collaborations, and what do you think is unique about your situation?
So I think there's a couple of aspects. I get asked this question pretty often. I mean, first of all, we don't see ourselves as competitive with any of those existing. I first would like to, we're having active conversations with ISDA. As you probably know, they have sort of made available a CDM. It's already fully open source. I think you can really contribute to it, but they're moving in that direction. So first of all, we're not trying to compete, but we're trying to support with that. I think the one big differentiator is that many of these consortia are pay for play, and instead, of course, we are a membership-based foundation, kind of 166 nonprofit. And so we have paying members that help us pay the bill, but that is not a requirement for contributing code or participating to any working group. So I think the main differentiator, that's hopefully where we're going to see a bit more of the dynamo effect, of the network effect, not just of a closed group, but also bringing in all the startups, bringing in individuals that want to promote themselves in the industry. I will be supporting and maintaining that line of everyone can participate to our community for as long as I run the foundation. And I think the second one is open source itself. I mean, there's been previous approaches to or attempts to open source. Lodestone being one, if you guys are familiar with it, was a Deutsche Bank, HSBC, a couple of others. But open source has always been kind of an afterthought, meaning, well, and we'll make the code available when we want to, a certain extent and to a certain, maybe restrict the public. I firmly believe, and I think does as well, that open source in this case can be really the vehicle of adoption. Sometimes open standards lack. We all probably are familiar with the browser wars, and it took 15 years to get to a decent implementation of the HTML and our pages would get rendered. And I would want to say that happened when things like Chromium and Chromium and Firefox came out. So I really, and in my sort of experience in the past, I worked with open standards, and I've not seen the traction that I've seen when there was an actual open source piece of code that they all could collaborate on that implements that standard. So again, I think everyone being able to participate and the actual focus on open source, not just design diagrams or slide decks. I think those are the main differentiators.
It's funny you mentioned that. I mean, it does paint a stark contrast with another effort that will go unnamed that I participated in around trying to build some open standards in the financial services space, but it is a closed governance structure and a closed process for building those standards, and adoption is lagging badly, and even the organization's own members aren't necessarily adopting the standards.
Yeah.
So.
No, and I'd be happy. Like, we see ourselves as a really good conduit, even for those. Like, for example, with the conversations we had with ISDA, we like, look, I know you guys want to maybe come up with a standard in behind closed doors. That's perfectly fine. Let's start by we can help you with the code governance. It's hard to set up a whole code governance. I mean, a couple of our members that joined us, they were like, well, we've been trying to do this for the longest time, and we always stumbled along how we actually manage the code, who can commit, who can't. And these are sort of, methodologies that are proven to be successful in other industries. So, we didn't really invent anything here, we're just, using things that have been used in other industries successfully.
Yep. Yeah, hi, Edith Chip, Stonehill College. I imagine the cybersecurity risk management is.
Just yell it.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so.
Just mic drop.
I teach, so I can't talk. I'm used to it. So I imagine the cyber risk management in an open source system should be a lot more complicated than in managing it in a closed system. So when you are developing this open source solutions or thinking about how to regulate it, is there a parallel effort to create this cyber risk management tools? As much effort and how much the consumers should be concerned about it.
Okay. Well, I'll pass it off to you. Just a quick anecdote. I spent, one of the biggest challenges in cyber risk in an open environment like this is collaboration and communication around, identifying threats or vulnerabilities or code bugs, et cetera. And I spent a good part of the day over at MIT, and their digital currency initiative just launched a cybersecurity initiative looking in particular at some of these cyber issues in cryptocurrencies, and the fact that there is, all software is buggy, and a lot of the code that a bunch of these cryptocurrencies are based on, and in fact, a lot of the code that they share amongst each other, does have bugs in it, and there's no sort of process for identifying and declaring vulnerabilities when they become apparent. And in fact, there are massive incentives to exploit those vulnerabilities, just because what you're actually the vulnerability you're exploiting could literally be used in some cases to put a bunch of money in one of your wallets or accounts. So it's an active project MIT is working on. I mean, I don't have any particular expertise bring to bear on that topic, other than to suggest that the collaboration and communication is a key issue that they've identified, and a role that the MIT group is trying to play in bringing people within the ecosystem together. It strikes me that that's a role for a FinSvcs or another sort of collaborative group to play, but that seemed to be, that was a challenge that they identified to me in articulating why they set up the CSI initiative within the digital currency group at MIT.
That's really interesting. Well, I'm gonna stay away from the long-standing debate between what's more secure, proprietary software versus open source software, security and NI versus security and obscurity. So completely dodged that question.
No, you just answered it.
But truly, like to address your question, I think there's sort of two things that we I think we should think about it. I mean, the first one is, if you think about, people say, if you're familiar with the Equifax breach, I think everyone is, that was based on an open source library with struts. And so people were like, see, open source is bad. And sure, you may think about Heartbleed a few years ago, same thing. That was on OpenSSL, like a library that's been there for like 30 years and that the whole world is using. But there's these two examples bring me to the two things. Equifax, I mean, they were using like struts 0.01, like a version of 20 years ago. I'm exaggerating now, but in terms of open source consumption, as we were talking before, it's fundamental that people keep libraries up to date, and that's really one of the sort of rule-based, automation and softwares and pieces of components that we make available as an example in our open development platform, and that we enable people in the firm to say, hey, look, you got to make sure that your open source is up to date. So really being current. And the second one is, despite OpenSSL has been there for 20 years, there wasn't enough investment in it. And so, for example, the Linux Foundation came up with the Core Infrastructure Initiative, which is like the biggest tech vendors, put a lot of money in there to make sure that the core pieces of infrastructure are not only open source, but are monitored and invested in, and bugs are fixed. And so investing, having a foundation that has some budget available to then allocate on specific areas around cybersecurity. I mean, we're starting to consider working with Hron, the bug bounty company. So pretty big in open source. So bug bounties would be one way. So I would say we certainly think deeply about this, but I think it's important to understand that this is not just an open source versus proprietary conversation. Is more you got to be responsible for what you bring in your own data centers, and FinSvcs can help and make sure that they're good to a certain extent, as well as provide a centralized entity that you can work with for responsible disclosure, for example. But it's ultimately on your side that you're going to take that piece of open source software and put it in your data center.
The investment challenge is interesting, and obviously, I think historically a challenge for open source in general, right? It's just who has the incentive to actually contribute to invest and maintain. And that's one of the challenges that that a lot of cryptocurrency enthusiasts see, or see that the role of tokens and cryptocurrencies playing is providing that financial incentive to contribute to and participate in open decentralized networks. And I think that'll be really interesting to see if that is one potential solution here. I mean, in financial services where you're working on shared solutions to shared problems, you have a joint incentive. I mean, the FinSvcs members are jointly incentivized together and manage these things. So I think it's a little bit different there, but that has historically been a problem.
So just for time reasons, so I'm told we have only one more question, which the person with the microphone back there, and then afterwards, people are welcome to stick around for a little while longer, network, and continue to ask questions one-on-one. So back there with my tone.
This is Warren from Northern Bank. I come at this more from the retail commercial side versus capital markets, but wondered if you're aware of any work going on in open source in the payments world, particularly the real-time payments world. You guys, smaller bank in the community, most of the efforts that we're connected to or have access to are closed system, proprietary, owned by entities who have every incentive to not make it easy for us to take advantage. And so, and it's an area where U.S. market, we're way behind the rest of the world. And so I'm just curious whether you see efforts underway to apply open source to the payment side of the United States.
Open source core.
So, no. Now, the truth is, we've been very focused on capital markets and investment banking, but as we now have, obviously many of our firms have also a retail arm, and, recently Capital One joined the foundation, which is actually not only is it a huge leader in outsourcing financial services, they have it all figured out. We see them in actually mainstream open source conferences. I do think that there's a huge potential there. I hope that we will have a retail program in H2. And as I said before, this is open to everyone. So, as much as, we are here to sort of make sure that we can mediate across some of these commercial dynamics, and that the commercial dynamics actually stay out of the foundation, meaning decisions. So there's actually if you look at our governance, there's really a deep line between our board and the actual projects that happen in the community. Like, the community is governed by contribution. So if you were to come, for example, tomorrow and propose a project and be a leader and put sweat equity in it, there would be basically no way for political and commercial dynamics to stop you from sort of collaborating. Obviously, then the adoption and who would collaborate on it, that's a whole other conversation. But I think, and I look forward to have a retail program, B, actually participation from mid-sized, credit unions, and I know that this is huge and a much more natural drive for collaboration actually in smaller and mid-sized banks. So I'm certainly looking forward to some leaders coming up and put some sweat equity in it.
You said volunteer.
Yes. In other words.
So I think that's going to be our last word. Please thank our panelists very much.
Two minutes. I want to take on this. First of all, thank you for everyone for coming, and thank you for Ben and McCarter and English for hosting us in this wonderful panel. And thank you very much to our panelists, Gavin, Jonah. I've got a quick few announcements. The next meetup is going to be on June 11th. We're going to be discussing about the future of banking and payments. We will have a number of startups, payment startups. So,
Is he going to be on stage?
And I also had a few books from Karen Mills's event last last month, April. April meetup. She graciously donated a few of her books for anyone who did not pick up one. So if you want, first come, first serve, just come and see me afterwards. And Jean, you wanted to say a few words?
Oh, yes. I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware. We're getting ready for the 3rd annual Boston FinTech Week. We'll be happening September 9th through 12th. And so we'll be having a save the date coming out shortly. But if you want to get involved, please email Boston FinTech Week at fintechsandbox.org. So we've got an email address and stuff. If you want to be involved in any way, just reach out to us. But it should be an amazing event, even bigger.
Thank you. Your name.
Thank you, guys.
No, I haven't. Only through the